Welcome to the API Connections podcast. In this episode, I continue my conversation with data scientist Koo Ping Shung. In part one, we discussed the complexities of AI governance, bias, and the importance of transparency and review mechanisms to address these biases. In part two, we continue our discussion with how organizations face the challenges of implementing data practices and the impact this has on AI governance. We talk about the importance of documentation and knowledge management, particularly when onboarding new talent, and we discuss the role of AI itself in enhancing documentation efforts with the aim of producing trustable AI. Within an organization, what are the sort of governance reviews that you typically see for the data science capability team that you work with?
Actually, if you ask me, I don't really see much. Reason being, I think companies right now are still struggling with using data in the first place. So, like for instance, how to do good reporting, how do we set up the right performance matrix, and also talk about like visualization, setting up the right dashboards, and so on and so forth. So, organizations, to be fair, I think they haven't reached that maturity level. Most of the organization hasn't reached that maturity level yet. When it comes to using AI. From what I observe. So I can't say for sure what, when it comes to governance itself, right, what should they do? But I think governance, if you look at it, right, it's very similar to audit. If you look at it, it's very similar to audit in any companies itself. So at the end of the day, the key is to prevent uh, known abuses. The key is to actually be able to prevent known abuses first. How do we do that? Will be documentation. You have to have a lot of use cases in order to set up a strong framework for AI governance. And I haven't seen that also as well in some of the more matured companies in terms of in terms of having a library of use cases. In fact, the thing is that even for at the national level, I do feel that there's a strong need to have a library of use cases, both successful and failed, for companies or even for participants or for data scientists or AI engineers, right, to be able to reference on it so that they can design AI tools, right, that doesn't get abused easily. I would just say that doesn't get abused easily, based on all the past learnings and lessons from the library of use cases. I think documentation will be important for companies because there's some sort of knowledge management component to it because you retain the knowledge also within the organization. If you do good documentation, if you have a library of use cases altogether.
So knowledge management is one of the use cases for AI, because a lot of organizations have had to spend. Documentation is hard, and also sharing documentation is hard across an organization. Many organizations have developed a knowledge management capability, but it requires upkeep. We want to make sure that all their contact center agents, for example, know about all the different situations the customer may be in and what are the different ways that can be addressed. So they've built a knowledge base. If they have to have people constantly cataloging these things and then sharing them with everyone so that they know what to expect, then that's a challenge. And this is why companies have been interested in creating chatbots for use by internal employees that help them to tap the knowledge base of the company. In software development, we see possibilities for using AI to generate test cases, because test cases are also a hard thing to do,
Yeah.
a time-consuming thing to do. I wouldn't say it's rocket science, but it's one of those things that people often don't spend enough time preparing because we're too busy trying to write the code and not enough time testing for all the different possible conditions or thinking about all the different error conditions that may occur. But AI can help to generate some of these. Some of them may not be as good as others, but it could help. So is AI? Should we be thinking about tooling for how we're going to test models at the same time as we're figuring out how to create the models?
I mean, there are standard ways for testing the models. Not saying no. There are standard ways really that is done. So like even LLM in the past 1 year already have some idea like how to retest one LLM over another. So like maybe even on a human test, like maybe a PSLE over here or a bar exam somewhere else and so on and so forth. But I feel at the end of the day, okay, so coming back to the question, coming back to the point that you wanted to say that, hey, can we use so LM can be a tool for us to do knowledge management, but we shouldn't forget the fact that LM are trained on documents, and if you want the knowledge to be retained within the LM itself, then the documentation needs to be there regardless. And if you want it to be better, if you want the LM to be better, you want the knowledge management to be better, then all the more you need more documentation to train it. So I think to your point, I would say probably LM is very good for retrieval, to be used for knowledge management, knowledge retrieval. But at the end of the day, companies cannot run away from the fact that they have to do up their documentation, and how good the retrieval will be, right, will depends on how good the documentation is done. But to your point, I do feel the same in the sense that yeah, documentation is important, but everyone don't not really want to do it in the first place because for most reason is because it's very mundane, and also you don't know whether you can't see the impact of doing good documentation until you need it, which by then also can be too
Yeah.
late as well.
You don't know if anyone's going to use it, even if even if you yourself are going to use it. So yeah, it can be
Yeah.
hard to predict.
So I don't deny that documentation has been a sort of a very big itch, very big itch on most organizations that is very difficult to sort of scratch it away. uh,
Mm,
but I kind of feel also the thing is I have this idea, and that is actually why not use documentation, right, to train and onboard talents. So what do I mean by that would be, I mean, at the end of the day, a talent once it goes into onboarding into a company, he or she will need to learn the ups and downs, the ins and outs of the company. And this is where keeping documentation helps. The person will also be, how to put it, the person will also take a stand and says that I do not know whether this is important or not. It's okay, I'll try to document them down as much as possible. With that in mind, right, and now with LLMs, the intern or the new guy or gal can actually use LLMs, right, to try and do documentation faster, or at least get some guidance on what kind of documentation is needed, maybe for a certain project. Like for instance, you can always go to LLM and say, yeah, I need to do documentation on the data collection. Can you state down the areas on what I should be talking about in my documentation for data collection through the LLM? So the LLM will definitely give you some
mhm.
idea like what are the things you need to record, and then you can start recording or start documenting from there. I see that helping. I see a LLM be able to help on what areas to document, and also later on, right, the retrieval part or fast retrieval. That means you use the LLM to then turn it into a
Mm,
chatbot, and then you can be able to retrieve the necessary
yeah,
information much faster. Yeah.
yeah. So there's, I guess there are aspects that are very general to
Mm,
general best practice
mm,
for every company, but then
mm,
there are things that are specific to a
mm,
company and its own
mm.
knowledge.
Yeah.
But to your earlier point, what it means is that you, if a company organization is going to get the most value out of the AI model, then they're going to have to make sure that they've got the data foundations right.
Yeah.
Data is never going to be perfect, but we should be constantly trying to improve the data
Yes.
that we have and improve the data quality.
I think one of the biggest uh, mindset trap that most businesses have, right, is they will always think that it's one step to perfection. But once you do data, that's not really the thing. Once you do data, you know that there's no such thing as a perfection, one step to perfection. It's actually taking several steps. And as you go through the smaller steps, right, we learn along the way to perfection. But perfection will always be how to say perfection will just be an idea and vision that you can have. Because at the end of the day, things will change along the way. And your perfection will be a goalpost that keeps on moving because of all these different changes. But that's not an excuse not to chase that vision of perfection. So in terms of like collecting data, in terms of like building the best model and so on and so forth, I think a lot of businesses need to realize that once you get into this business of using AI for your process and all this, right, it's always a continuous learning process along the way. And in order to sort of tap onto this learning process, right, don't sort of let too much value leak out from it, right? Would be to do good documentation along the way as well. Yeah.
Yes, it's about process and not
Yeah.
simply. Or you need projects to run, but you
Mm.
need ongoing processes of improvement and continuous improvement.
Yep.
And I think it's a bit like renovating your house. Once you start, you never really stop. The next time you're walking in your house, you say, "Well, that part I think I did pretty well, but there's
Mm.
now that part stands out more, and I need to fix that." So you need to keep working on it. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I think there's a number of things that some of it's good housekeeping, and but is also that we all have to keep um, updating ourselves on the knowledge of things,
Mm.
whether we are technical or not,
Yeah.
whether we want AI to be, especially because it can be a tool for us, but we should also be sharing our own expertise on the evolution of how AI is being used in the rest of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So, thanks very much for sharing that perspective. Do you have what any sort of message to someone who's looking to either make use of AI models themselves
Mm.
or want to expand its usage in the organization, trustable and governable sort of way?
Yeah. Well, okay. So I think for a very good how to say for a very good part of this discussion that we had, right? We have been talking about AI governance, but actually, I'm of the opinion. I think you have used a few words already. Used that word for a few times, which is trustable. Actually, in fact, the thing is, if I were to look at it, right, at the end of the day, what we want to build is AI that humanity can trust. When you talk about AI ethics, you talk about AI governance, all these are not hitting the crux of the issue. And the crux of the issue is that an AI that I can trust that will look out for every stakeholder's benefits and be able to balance every stakeholder's benefits and risk and of course disadvantage and so on and so forth. So I'm of the opinion we should focus on building trust in AI and not just governance alone and not just AI ethics alone. And in fact, the thing is, I kind of feel this thing about building ethics into machines is a bit of, if I were to use a mild word, not so great. I don't believe in AI. I don't really believe in ethical machines. Why is that so? Right? It's because how many of us human beings dare to call ourselves or dare to proclaim ourselves that we are ethical in the first place. So if there are situations where we are not ethical, so we are not really a fully 100% ethical human being in the first place, or really Homo sapiens in the first place. What makes us in the position where we can build ethical machine? Then I kind of feel it's a bit of an egotistical view that we say that oh we can build ethical machine when we ourselves cannot even confirm that we are ethical 100% of the time. So that's AI ethics. And the other thing is also this, we humans haven't been able to resolve, or I won't say resolve, like, resolve may not be the right word. We human being haven't even come up with with an agreeable solution for 100% of humans, right, when it comes to the trolley problem. I'm sure your audience, most of your audience will know what's the trolley problem. And there's a very good chance that we will come into a certain situation or value discussion, right, where we don't agree with each other. So that happens a lot when I'm conducting my classes in AI ethics, where I talk about AI ethics is very difficult. It's a very difficult concept, and I don't think anyone can be an expert in it in the first place unless you are expert in in philosophy, especially ethics and morals. And if you're and also an expert in AI, I haven't found someone who's expert in both. So if I don't think that's the case, then I don't think anyone can be an AI ethics expert. I'm not sure, but I'm waiting for someone to disprove me. I'm more than happy to have someone disprove me. So again, I'm not a strong proponent of AI ethics. I don't think we can build ethical machines. And in fact, recently I came across a book. It's called Escape from Model Land. This one is a book I recently finished. The book was actually talking about this part about human judgment and machine judgment. So if you look at human judgment, right, we humans know how to juggle the many different values. So like going back to the trolley problem, right? We'll know that, oh, let's say for instance, maybe it's three cats versus one human on the other track. We know how to juggle and make a decision and says that no, I think animal at the end of the day may not be that precious compared to one single human life and so on and so forth. So human judgment can juggle many different values. Human judgment can juggle many different values. But when it comes to machine judgment, it's a bit different. Machine judgment, it depends on what? It depends on the designer. And the designer or the model trainer will have to fix and say this is a certain value we want to chase. Like for instance, we want to chase fairness. The person who's building the model will have to focus on building fairness into the model. It's very difficult to say, oh, I want to build fairness, I will build transparency, I want to build everything, all this into a model. There's no such model. Every model will have its give and take on certain values. So this is where there's a difference between human judgment and machine judgment then, in that sense. And in that case also, then what makes us think, like I said, how do we build an ethical machine where 100% of humanity can agree that, oh, this is the solution to this particular problem. So ethics is one. Governance already just now as mentioned already, and I think like I shared just now, when it comes to governance, right, there's so many different areas to consider. Just now, John, you were also mentioning that there are other areas as well, like and so on and so forth. There are so many areas. It's very difficult to find one single person to know everything. But in fact, if you ask me, it's also very difficult to find someone who knows at least two of these areas. And you need that because at the end of the day, there are so many different areas, right? All will have their own agenda and own different points they want to look at, right? So how do we come up with final conclusion after the meeting? You cannot after the meeting of a governance committee and then after that nothing happens. It cannot work that way. Communication is going to be very important here, and this is where, like I said, I think it's very difficult to juggle in the AI governance committee, right? There are so many different opinions, different areas. At the end of the day, how do we come up with the final decision? And that itself, I think we can foresee that all of us have worked in the corporate for the longest time. All of us can foresee that maybe just making that one single decision, right, can maybe take 6 months to a year. And there's no way AI innovation in AI can wait for you 6 months to a year and say, okay, we wait for your decision to finish first before we innovate the next step. No, no such things gonna happen. So I feel AI governance at the end of the day, yes, it's part of the toolkit to regulate AI, but it shouldn't be the ultimate toolkit. If we were to have more people use AI, at the end of the day, I think for more people to use AI, is I need to trust that AI, which is why I said trustable AI. I think we should be aiming for building trustable AI people you can trust. Very straightforward. You look at it from a human to human perspective. John, if you don't trust that I'm going to share something important or something valuable to your audiences, you won't be inviting me, right? You won't be using it. So there's a certain level of trust, and trust it's not easy to get, but it's very easy to lose. So I kind of feel at the end of the day, the crux of the whole thing is to build trustable AI that a lot of people can trust, and then AI can be used more for humanity at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
I do get a lot of questions. People ask me, "Cool, why do you call it trustable AI and not trustworthy AI in the first place?" Because I think the common buzzword now is actually trustworthy AI. But I kind of feel to call it trustworthy, right, is I probably maybe my English is limited, but I will only call a human trustworthy, but an object trustable. So we all know that humans have a big issue when it comes to inanimate objects, and that's it's called anthropomorphizing. I don't know whether I don't think I pronounced it correctly, but you
Mm-hmm.
get the picture. As in, like we tend to treat both animate objects and inanimate objects, right, as fellow beings, as a human. So there's a certain advantage and disadvantage to it. I'm not saying it's bad, but to call it trustworthy AI, right, it's sort of you're seeing that AI as a human being rather. I kind of feel, and
Yeah, I guess my interpretation would be
mm,
trustable means you trust it to do a certain thing, but
yeah,
trustworthy means you trust it to act in my interests
mm,
every time, and,
okay,
or make sure you're going to look after me. And trustable doesn't necessarily mean that. Um,
mm,
it means that you should be able to predict what the result or what the outcome will be within a reasonable.
yeah. I think what you're
I
trying
think.
to, what, mm,
Right.
I think I think what you're trying to refer to over here is that trustable is at the task level. Trustworthy is sort of at the entity level. That trustworthy means you say that this
Mm-hmm.
particular entity is trustworthy. Maybe the particular entity, when it comes to certain tasks, may not be that trustable. Could be right. Yeah, that's a good point to look at. I'm not saying that's a good point to look at. Something to think about more definitely. But for now at least, like I said, I think I would rather call it trustable AI and see AI as a inanimate non-human being object and say that it's trustable
Mm-hmm.
rather than call it trustworthy AI lah. But I think
Mm-hmm.
this is just an argument on the semantic side of things lah. And I'm not saying I'm not denying the fact also I'm trying to carve out a niche altogether by calling it trustable AI rather than trustworthy
Mm-hmm.
AI.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a lot to think about, and I
Yeah.
guess the upshot of that is that we can't expect that we're going to get two or three simple rules that solve
No.
every situation. Actually, the concept of rules, past rules, is a separate discussion also because there are the rules based and principles based approaches to the law
Yeah.
and regulation. Thanks very much, Koo, for giving us lots of things to think about,
No problem.
and I appreciate that whether we're technical or not, whether we're data science is our specialty or not, we all need to keep seeking how to make best use of AI, but
Yeah.
also contribute our own professional knowledge to the improvement of the use of AI by others. So
Yeah.
thanks very much.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Thanks, John.